Hello everyone, this is our first Netrockers lesson, and today we're going to cover the Age of Chaucer. We will not be seeing Canterbury Tales, only the introduction and other works of Chaucer. Now for some general instructions, listen to this whenever you can, and then also read up on your history of English literature books and do the weekly quiz. You'll be more likely to clear net this time. So here we go. First, Age of Chaucer starts by 1340 to 1400. This is the Age of Chaucer. But what was so special about this period was there was great political, social, religious, and literary activity during this time. It was something different. In the previous Anglo-Saxon age, it was mostly French and all these languages, but now English people are getting their own identity, and Chaucer is the forerunner to give them a wonderful identity as such. And so, and another important point is English people didn't really have a nationalistic view. They didn't realize that they were English until this time. They didn't have their own literature as such. They followed the Greeks, the Italians, but now they wanted their own nationalistic view, and Chaucer helps them out with his literary works. First and foremost, we will not be covering the social cultural backgrounds here, or the wars, the Hundred Years' War, Edwardian era, Carolingian War, nothing. We will straightly jump to the Black Death, which is important even during this time. Black Death basically is a pandemic. That means suddenly many people started dying. It's because of a rat disease, or shall we say, it's an epidemic, and lots of people died. Actually, more than 4 million people died during this time in Europe. It was one of the greatest plagues on earth, and it almost killed 30 to 40% of the entire population of England. That's a massive amount of people dying at that time. Because of this, the laborers were lost, people became poor, the country became poor. This was one of the reasons that England was suffering during this time. And then, of course, this all happens in 1348. And then, coming to the next important point, that's the peasants' revolt, is during 1381. The peasants were fed up with the government and all these problems. There was taxes imposed on them, so they all got angry, and then they wanted more pay. So all these peasants start revolting. It's basically in the backdrop of the Black Death. They refused to pay any tax. So this tax problem became a big issue, and the revolt began. And when all the locals said they will not pay taxes, and from the villages they all moved, and they started making a big revolt. And they also wanted to meet the king during this time. And there was one particular man called Wat Tyler. He was the one who explained to the king about the uh, rebels, not rebels actually, the peasants' request that there should not be any tax, but they didn't listen. Unfortunately, even Tyler dies during this time. And now, two important things we have seen, that is the Black Death and the Peasants' Revolt. These two are very important in the context that you want to see. And next, if you're going to the literary trends of this age, of course, as I've already said, the French, the Italian, the Greek, all these literatures of Europe had a great influence on England. Most of these English people were reading other languages. They thought speaking in French or speaking in Greek or Latin was way superior to talking in English. So this basically was changed during this time. Actually, it's a literary revival during this time. And two important works people should understand, that is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This work doesn't have an author, it's anonymous. We don't know who wrote it, but it's one of the most prime works during this time. And now, You have to be clear on all those works. So we have seen the introduction to the Age of Chaucer. First is the Black Death, and then is the Peasants' Revolt. And now we'll get into the works. So let's start with literary trends of the age. So literary trends of the age. First we have alliterative revival. What do you mean by that? Is basically there was this masterpiece called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Pliers Plowman. These both works were written in a style. Alliterations were used again and again in the poetry, so that's why it was called the alliterative revival. People started using alliterations to write poems, and then we are talking about romances in the Age of Chaucer. The first work, romances of the Age of Chaucer, is the Tale of Gamelin. It's basically a 900 line work. It's about a story of a young son and who has a wicked brother, but his dad dies. So his elder brother is trying to cheat and get the inheritance out of him. Basically, as you like it kind of story. But these are the romances during this time. The Tale of Gamelin. You don't need to know all these things in detail, but just the work, the author, and why is it important. That will do. And next we can see William and the Werewolf. William and the Werewolf is basically a retelling of a much older work that's in French. So this is the first fiction to feature a benevolent werewolf. Werewolf stories are famous, and William and the Werewolf is one of the great stories that time. No one knows who wrote this. It was just translated from French. And so next, as I already mentioned, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It was basically during the 14th century that they wrote this. It was of course it has a reference to British lineage. After the Troy War, the Britons, how did they come and all those things. This is what the story is all about, but no one knows who's the author. It's anonymous. So these are the things we see in little trends of the age. First we have the alliterative revival. So they started writing in this. And what are the romances in the age? The Tale of Gamelin, and the William and the Werewolf, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Basically all these three works, no one knows who actually wrote them because they are very old ones now. And another work you gotta see is the Pearl Poet. Like, we don't know the date and the year of this unknown writer, but the Pearl Poet or Gawain Poet, we don't know, but we just call him the Pearl Poet. He's the same guy who wrote this Gawain and the Green Knight, and there are a lot of references to him. It's actually the only time that there are any references are in the Gawain and the Green Knight works. So this is one of the important works during this time. So while Chaucer was writing in English and he was staying in London, Gawain Poet wrote in the dialect of Cheshire, a country in the Northwest Midlands. He was writing in a different style. So this is called the Pearl Poet. But there is symbolism in the Pearl poem. Actually, everyone get a different meaning from reading this work. It's like it's filled with a lot of symbolisms, and so whoever reads it can get different ideas from it. But they're not very clear. They're vague. They're difficult to understand. So that's about the Pearl Poet. Next, we will go to Chaucer, his works. It's important. So remember, we have seen Black Death, Peasants' Revolt, then Little Trends in the Age. We have completed all that. And now let's move to Chaucer. Chaucer was from 1343 to 1400, and he is the prime writer during this time. Some important things. He's called the father of English poetry and not English literature. Keep that in mind, not English literature, but father of English poetry as such. First of all, we have to divide his life into three periods. First comes the French period, and then the Italian period, and then the English period. It's pretty simple why we say that. French period, he was basically, and you should understand something, that court, all the courts, the king's council, they all use French. It was like the official language at the time. So Chaucer was in the court, and so he wanted to impress these aristocrats. So he wanted to write in French. This is the first period. So during this time, he published some books, and they are all the French period books, and he wrote primarily in French. And then we go to the second period. This is called the Italian period. Here, basically, what happens is he's influenced by Italian writers like Dante, Boccaccio, and all these writers. And so, with their influence, he wrote these works. This is the second period of his life. But the most important thing is the third period, that's the English period, where he says, like, enough of French and Italian, let me write in my own mother tongue. And that's when he wrote the masterpiece, the 17,000 line Canterbury Tales, which is not complete as such. So these are the three periods. Now the first period, he wrote books like the Book of the Duchess, and the second period he wrote House of Fame, Fall of Troy, Parliament of Owls, and all these works. Third period, Legend of Good Women and Canterbury Tales. So we'll see one by one all his works. Before that, why is he so important? Because Matthew Arnold called him the father of a splendid English poetry. And even a cross reference, you can see a Lady's Scoop by Anita Nair. She uses the same technique. Like, there are some people in a bar, in a inn, and they're talking in the same way. Lady's Scoop, they're sitting in a train, and all these characters are narrating their stories. Many people have used this technique, and it's all because of Geoffrey Chaucer. And of course, there are linguistic importance of Chaucer, as he took words from French, Italian, and all these things, but he made English what it is today. Of course, he found his native tongue a dialect and left it a language. It's what American poet Lowell wrote. Remember these lines because they might ask these things. So, an American poet Lowell says that Chaucer found his native tongue a dialect and left it a language. So, what are the works in French period? Roman de la Rose and Book of Duchess. So, let's start with the French period. First is Roman de la Rose. Basically, it's a French work, and the poem actually is very simple. The poet sleeps, and actually he can't sleep, and he's sitting on his bed and he's reading a book. Actually, he's reading a story of some old ancient people, and suddenly he falls asleep and he has a dream. In the dream, actually, he sees a man in black, a knight, who is in love with a beautiful lady, but that lady had died, and he meets that person. And when the poet wakes up, he wants to write that poem in a rhyme, in a poem. He wants to write the story in a rhyme format. Actually, it's written as an elegy for Blanche. She was the Duchess. So she was actually the Duchess of Lancaster. So it's a dream allegory, and that's called Roman de la Rose. Actually, Roman de la Rose has influence on the Book of Duchess. And next work is the Italian period. Here we have House of Fame and Parliament of Owls. House of Fame is quite simple. It's basically a dream allegory again, and it's about The narrator falls asleep and he sees a temple of the goddess Venus. And afterwards, in that temple, there is Virgil's Aeneid story depicted on the walls. So he sees that, and then in second book, he sees an eagle, and it speaks. The eagle speaks and tells him about Jove, the goddess Jove, and finally, it's about the House of Fame. He finally goes to the House of Fame, and he meets the goddess Fame. This is all an allegorical work. So that's the House of Fame, and it was the Italian period. And finally, we have the Parliament of Fowls. Fowls are birds here. Basically, just to celebrate the marriage of King Richard II and Anne of Bohemia. It's written. It's also a dream, but it's written in a rhyme royal stanza. It's basically in a court. All these fowls are gathered, and they're all having a debate about how to choose a mate, how to get a right person. Of course, the debate is unresolved, but the basic idea is the more noble you are, the more courtship is associated with it. That's the Parliament of Fowls. These are all in the Italian period, and you might be confused about the Roman de la Rose and Book of Duchess. I want to make it clear we are talking about Book of Duchess only, and it was influenced from Roman de la Rose. Chaucer did not write Roman de la Rose. It was from Guillaume Loris' work. From that work, he took the Book of Duchess and he wrote it. So basically, it was only one work during the time. Then Italian works, and now we'll go to the main works, the English period, and the Legend of Good Women. In the Legend of Good Women, very simple. He talks about all these famous epic characters. He talks how good they were, and about these characters, it was like history and myth. He took all these characters like Dido, Cleopatra, Lucrece, all these characters he took, and whatever goodness it was, he wrote about them. That's called the Legend of Good Women. But of course, it's an unfinished work. And of course, there is one more work called Troilus and Cressida. There's a big difference between this book and Shakespeare's work. Shakespeare also wrote same thing, but DACRISEYDA will be Shakespeare's work, DE will be Chaucer's work as such. So the work, it's actually 8,000 line work. It's a big book, and basically got the ideas from Boccaccio's story, where this all happens during the Trojan War. So what happens is she's a widow, Cressida, and Troilus is a young man. They fall in love, but she is not very loyal to him. She changed her mind. That's the storyline, and he is devastated by that. So that is about Troilus and Cressida. And finally, we are moving to the Canterbury Tales. We'll go into detail character analysis in the next session. But just to give you an idea, Canterbury Tales is the biggest tale. He wanted to have 120 tales, like 120 tales, but only 24 were complete. So very simple. All the characters are gathered in an inn. They're all in a pilgrimage to Saint Thomas Becket's place, and each one decides to tell us two stories on their way, going when they're going and when they're coming. Two stories. So in total, we are having 120 tales, but only 24 are written. So the 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 prologue to Canterbury Tales basically introduces all these characters. We'll see those things in the second session. Okay, just a quick recap of all the things we have seen today on the Age of Chaucer, because Chaucer's age is very important. We're seeing from 1340 to 1400. Then we have seen about Black Death and Peasants' Revolt, and then the alliterative revival, romances in the Age of Chaucer, has the Tale of Gamelin, William and the Werewolf, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and then the Pearl Poet. Then we come to Chaucer's works, first period, second period, and third period. The French period has only one thing, that is romance, that is the Book of the Duchess. It was influenced by Roman de la Rose. And you have to understand, Duchess Blanche was the wife of John Gwent. Just information you should know. And then second period is the Italian period, where we see House of Fame and Parliament of Owls. And then the third period has Legend of Good Women and Canterbury Tales. Okay, and then Canterbury, prologue to Canterbury Tales. And there's another writer here, and that is William Langland. Before going to William Langland's work, one ought to understand certain things. Of course, William Langland wrote a remarkable 14th century poem called Pliers the Ploughman. Pliers the Ploughman is a wonderful allegorical work, and it has three dreams. First, it's about the Holy Church and Lady Mead, who the dreamer. Actually, it's all a religious poem. So that's the first part of the poem. The second one is crowd of penance search for Saint Truth. All these people are all searching for Saint Truth. The basic idea is there is a plowman, and it's about his story. He's like farmer. And finally, we have the vision of do well, do better, and do best. So do well in sense, practice virtues, be a good person, like that. And do bet, B-E-T, in which Price becomes good Samaritan practicing charity. That means helping other people, you have to help others. And then do best, be the best of yourself, speak the truth, don't lie, and all these things. So there are three parts: do well, do better, and three dreams in it. So William Langland's this very important work, Pliers Ploughman. And then we have John Gower. He's not a major poet, but one work you ought to know about him is Confessio Amantis, meaning the lover's confession. It was written at the request of King Richard II, so he wanted something new, so he wrote. It's basically a collection of exemplary tales of love. So that's about it, about Confessio Amantis, or lover's confession. And then we have John Mandeville. No one knows the year or the death of this person, but he wrote one first non-fiction. Basically, it's called The Travels of Sir John Mandeville, the same work. So he just wrote about travels, but many people think they're all just made up stories about travels. It doesn't have any religious tone to it, but it just says about traveling. This book, 30 years of traveling it covers, and but no one knows if all these accounts are true or not, but it served as a wonderful book for travelers for many years. And then finally we have John Wycliffe. You have to know that he was called the Morning Star of the Reformation. He was called the Morning Star of Reformation, and he translated the Bible into English. For a complete translation of the Bible into English, and those people who followed him, they're called Lollards. Very important. They're called Lollards, and he was against the Pope. He thought like even normal people should be able to read Bible. So he was working in Oxford, and he was expelled from Oxford for his church against church doctrines. Okay, he translated from Latin into Middle English. He translated it, and with the help of his friends, he completed the work. So every normal person could read. And then there's the Lollard movement, who thought Pope is not the head. Each and everyone can have direct access to God. That's the whole concept of it. And his works, you need to know that the Bible is an important work, but its other works are Truth of the Sacred Scriptures, then the Pope's Power, Apostasy, and on the Eucharist and trialogue. So truth of the sacred scriptures, he talks about Bible. And then Pope's power, he says Pope is a man who is put by men and not by God. That's the whole idea there. And apostasy means he condemns again the Roman doctrine, the Pope's doctrine, the ideas. He doesn't agree with that. And then we go on to the on the Eucharist. He says uh, there also he talks about religious things. He's against it. And finally, there is a trilogue. He says Bible shall be translated into vernacular languages, whatever language. It should be read by all these normal people as well. So this is John Wycliffe. So these are all the most important writers, poets during the age of Chaucer. So we've seen most of them all. If you go through the text, it would be easier for you to remember this. So whenever you have doubts, you can just listen to it again. It will help you up. So anyway, thank you so much.